The last 2 years have been an unmasking and a shattering.
How do you perceive and see and think about Palestinian resistance?
But if you're not actually willing to support anything that could make those ideas a reality, then you're just posturing or whitewashing your own image, or shooting and crying, as they say. For the even younger Jews who mostly get their information on social media, I mean, immediately, this live stream of the genocide begins. And for them, that is profoundly radicalizing. I was part of a group of people that was protesting at the White House, within a week, saying, do not let a genocide unfold in Gaza. I mean, we heard the things that Israeli government officials were saying. We heard that evacuation warning for over 1 million people.
So when you see that, but yet you know that Tucker has sort of anti-immigrant, xenophobic, white supremacist, and what many people feel is anti-Semitic vibes as well. How do you feel?
The anti-Israel movement within MAGA, these people are not my allies. Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, these kind of right-wing media figures are part of some of the most nefarious forces within American society.
What's been the ideological change or movement or discussions been like?
The crisis is that every major institution of our community just participated in a genocide that has made a place where 2 million people called home, that has basically erased it from Earth. Well,
Yes.
I'm jet lagged, so I'm also
Yeah,
all
how's
that
that working out, the jet lag? How bad is it?
Last night was hard.
Oh, is this why you thought about the coffee?
Yeah. Because I've already had a coffee this morning.
Ooh, don't. Just put it to the side.
No, it's great. You're gonna get me talking. It's fine.
Okay, fine. I'm clapping. 3, 2, 1. Hi, good day. Welcome to another episode of Unapologetic. I'm your host, Ishfaq Karim, and I'm very glad to have in studio with me today Simone Zimmerman. Simone, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Simone, I'm really glad to have you here. We met a few weeks ago in Doha and were supposed to do our interview then, but both Simone and I, the Doha forum is quite overwhelming and we couldn't get it done there. Simone, if you're not familiar with her, and I'm sure you are, the movie Israelism kind of, it does many things, but one of the things it does is tracks her life. Specifically, it tracks her journey from being someone who, as a Jew and an American and someone who has family in Israel, was very close to Israel. And then she kind of becomes disoriented with Israel and what it does. Simone, the movie was released in 2023. This is before October 7th. And since then, there's been a genocide unfolding. So in many ways, I know that you were known before 2023, but obviously the movie raises your profile, and then due to the genocide, you are then cast into a limelight where you are speaking about Israel's actions and trying to give context to many things. Like many of us that have been looking at the genocide, it's also probably been really overwhelming, what's occurred, the extent of what's occurred, and the extent of how it's probably just impacted our lives and impacted how we think about the world. Very broad question to begin with, but what has the last 2 years taught you about anything, about yourself, about the world? And you don't have to answer the whole thing now because we're probably going to spend the next 2 hours discussing that. But just right off the top of your head, what's it taught you?
Oh man, I knew we were going to talk about this and still you're asking me, and I'm totally overwhelmed to answer this question. Well, it's really good to be here. I think what the last 2 years have been an unmasking and a shattering. Those, for me, there's something that's been really honest about the last 2 years and really heartbreaking and heart-opening about it. I mean, you mentioned that Israelism came out well before October 7th. I think what's relevant about that is that there was a context. There has been an ongoing situation of ongoing occupation, apartheid, siege in the land between the river and the sea, a worsening condition on the ground, and all of those things are what led to the horrors of the last 2 years that we've seen. And I think for me, even still to this day, there are people who say we can't talk about that context. And I think the reason Israelism ended up resonating so widely across the world is because when the genocide began, people were looking to understand this couldn't have come out of nowhere. Where did this come from? And I think the film was one of many, many resources that helped people make sense of like the gap between the narrative that they were hearing in kind of mainstream media or narratives that they were raised with, particularly in Western countries, and what they were actually seeing unfold live on social media.
Okay, now, I mean, it's like I mentioned previously that it's hard for us to actually process what's occurred in the last 2 years, and I think we'll be processing it for a long time. And I think mostly Palestinians in Gaza, but I think Palestinians in the diaspora, Palestinians in the West Bank, all of them would probably be processing it for a long time if they're ever given the luxury of given the time to actually process it. Naturally, how did you feel when the movie came out? I mean, you didn't yet know October 7th was going to happen, obviously, but in terms of the chatter that was going to occur about the movie, because obviously for a long while now you've been a pro-Palestinian, anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli, at least as how Israel is behaving at the moment, activist, and that comes with a lot of skin in the game. There's a lot of criticism, there's a lot of introspection that you probably have to do about that. You probably have to go through an intellectual journey consistently, but just in terms of You had an expectancy of what this movie is probably going to do in terms of changing your life. It may not have been substantial, but there was some expectancy. And then there's this genocide, which is a shattering and an unmasking. And just how did that sort of change what your expectations was?
To be honest with you, I thought that this film was going to be doing like a synagogue tour, basically. I mean, I've been an activist for the last, I guess, like 15 years or so, trying to open up space inside the American Jewish community for grappling with the reality on the ground in Israel-Palestine. And I thought that the film was going to be basically a tool that we could bring into community spaces to help younger Jews continue along the journey, and also to help older Jews make sense of the political awakening that many of their kids were going through, right? And to kind of facilitate an inter-community dialogue, or
intra-community.
Intra-community dialogue.
It could also be inter-community, if like there's the Jewish community in America and the Jewish community in Israel, and the one in Brooklyn and the one in Chicago, etc.
Exactly.
It's
So,
both, yeah.
Well, what ended up happening is that I think the film actually ended up being a tool much more for inter-community dialogue. I mean, it's been like, there are a lot of things that have been really beautiful and humbling about my experience kind of moving around with the film over the last 2 years, almost 3 years now. Getting stopped by Jews literally on the street who say, this is the only thing that helped me talk to my parent, a parent who comes up and says, this is the thing that helped us have a conversation inside of our home. Those things are just like so moving to me that it's actually been a tool for people to like make sense and have those conversations with the people that they love. And then also there's been, I've heard from people across the world. I heard from somebody whose families, who recognized a photo of their family from the Nakba in the film, and like saw the film and reached out to say how grateful they were that the film tells also the story of what happened in 1948 to their family. So it's really, and then of course like, not Jewish or Palestinian, just people all over the world who are probably living in a place where they are being told that the genocide being waged in Gaza is being committed in the name of all Jewish people, that all Jews support the state of Israel, and then they're watching this film and finding out that there are actually thousands of us around the world, hundreds of thousands of us who oppose the policies of the Israeli government, who are participating in the mass protest movements, who are standing up and criticizing our own communities. That breaking of the conflation between all Jews in Israel and between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, I think has been a really essential contribution for giving people permission to act against, to take action against Israeli government policies and feel protected from that smear of anti-Semitism that is being, thrown so recklessly at people around the world. And also knowing, like, we are also acting in solidarity with many Jews who are also against all of this, and first and foremost being in solidarity with Palestinians.
Okay. Now, I mean, in the course of the next sort of hour and a half, 2 hours, we're going to get into a lot. We're going to get into, how anti-Semitism is real, and we've just seen, an awful attack in Australia. We're also going to talk about how it's weaponized. We're going to be speaking about the American landscape, the right and the left and the Democrats and the Republicans and MAGA. And obviously, we're going to be speaking about Gaza and what your identity, your journey. And I think we're going to be speaking about resistance and allyship, because I think they're similar and there's a difference. And I think we want to hopefully have a more, in-depth discussion that goes beyond sort of the normal, dialogue between people who think about themselves as pro-Palestinian and Jews specifically who are also pro-Palestinian, actually get into some of the more complex discussions. I'm not sure if we will actually reach that. That's an aspiration, but I mean that's what we hope to aspire for. So I mean the movie. I mean people who are seeing this may be familiar with the movie. They may have seen the movie. They may have seen it and forgot, or they may not have seen the movie. But it traces many things, but it does trace your journey a little bit. Like when I say a little bit, because obviously that journey is much more substantial than just what the movie shows. So if you can just give us a bit of insight into that, because when I saw the movie, which was just literally a few days ago, I was like waiting for so when does the story start with Simone? Because you're obviously right in the beginning, but then it's like sort of the second half is really about your unmasking to some extent. And there's this moment in UC Berkeley where you are, and there's footage of it in the movie, where you are clearly, confused, and you're saying these Israeli sound bites, talking points that were given to you, and for you that was like the opening, like why am I giving these talking points which make no sense? And what the movie says, and is that this, when you heard the Palestinians and their case, it became clear to you that like the answers that you have been given are not, and that almost like sparks, it like catalyzes this journey, right? Tell me about that moment, but then also what's the journey like afterwards? Because I think anyone who learns anything about themselves, it's a long process, and it's something we're still sort of undergoing. So, yeah.
Well, so I grew up in a community in which Israel and Judaism were inseparable. The story that I learned about like who I am and my place in the world was very much shaped by the legacy of the Holocaust, the fact that one of my grandparents escaped Warsaw, Poland in the 30s, moved to pre-state Palestine, was there in 1948. The founding of the Jewish state is, what quite literally saved his life and the life of many of his family members, and it also inspired the rest of his life. I mean, Zionism was a very deep commitment for him, and as it was for so much of my family and the community that I grew up in. And so, I have a line in the film that for me, like going to the AIPAC conference was just like another one of the things that I did, like going to synagogue, right? I mean, it was another place where I could just also like unite with other people from my community, my camp friends, my youth group friends. It's all part of this ecosystem. And you're kind of always hearing that when you go out into the world, when you go to college, people hate Israel out there, and it's your job to go tell them the truth. So what you're talking about in the film is the moment where I actually had to then confront this thing that my whole life I'd been told I was going to do, defend Israel from the people who hate it, and to kind of correct the lies. And that scene that you're talking about in the film where I'm, obviously it's like the thing that makes the film. It's also totally humiliating, but that's that's part of the job. And I basically say the case that I'm making is how can we make peace in the Middle East when we can't have peace on our own campus? Like, I'm a human being. Please don't silence me. Please don't ignore me. And I'm actually not confused at the time. At the time, like, I'm a true believer. That's really deeply what I feel. I feel that if an anti-Israel bill passes the student government, that I am going to be less safe in the world, that I'm not going to be welcome on my campus. That is a threat to like my existence and my community's safety. I mean, it was so deeply ingrained in me. At the same time, I was hearing all these things that Palestinian students were talking about. war crimes, occupation. I mean, just the daily reality of what it means to be a Palestinian in Palestine. And these were just realities that they were just not part of my reality. And initially I just I was just trying to figure out, like, do we have better talking points to debunk the things that these people are saying? Because, I mean, obviously, I mean, and again, I'm coming in and I'm like, I mean, I can see that these people are like, I mean, as I'm saying this, like, the racism is there, so I'm just, like, naming that. You know, I'm like, of course these people are human beings, but I don't think that they're lying, but I think there must be a rebuttal to what they're saying, right? And so I'm trying to find a better answer. At the time, and this goes to so much of, I think, what is happening on a college campus right now, I also understood that in the meantime, while I couldn't figure out a better answer, the thing we had to do was shut down the debate, right? Don't engage in what they're actually saying. Just say, I feel silenced, I feel marginalized, let's end this conversation so that this bill can pass.
From a perspective of defending the Jewish community or defending Israel?
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing, sorry, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but I think what we are seeing happening on universities around the US and also around the world is that Israel's defenders don't actually want to engage in the conversation because they know the facts are so bad that the thing that they need to do is shut down the conversation before it can be had. And I think that is so much of what this this kind of appeal to fear and safety and inclusion, what is actually underneath that? Okay. You're trying to avoid the conversation.
Yeah. So what happens next? What happens? So you're confronted by that conversation, and I mean, like, no, this, you obviously can't retell me 15 years of your life, but sort of what for you are the key moments that follows that gets you to the journey of the person who eventually, you know, like Israelism comes out and to eventually who you are right now. But what's that process? Because, you know, what happens that night? Do you go home and speak to your family? Do you meet with your friends? Like, I
go home that night and I remember I like wrote a message to a friend, like, I feel like Israel just got pushed closer to the sea. I mean, that's the rhetoric we get told. They want to push us into the sea.
And then how did that start flipping? When did you like, what was that information point where you're like, hey?
That summer I ended up getting a fellowship to go study in Jerusalem, and I'm just like desperate for anybody who will talk to me. There were two moments that summer that really stuck with me. The first is that I wound up visiting the Palestinian neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. And
what year is this? This is like 2012, 2013?
Summer 2010.
Okay.
Peter Beinart has just written an article in the New York Review of Books called The Failure of the American Jewish Establishment. He writes about how young Jews are being asked to choose between their Zionism and their liberalism. This blows my mind. I'm like, oh my God, I'm part of this bigger, that is what I kind of felt. Like, it does seem like there's a tension here, and that's interesting that there are other people around the country who are experiencing the same thing I'm experiencing. And he also talks about, at the time, Sheikh Jarrah was like this site of a solidarity movement. A lot of Israelis and Palestinians were kind of protesting there together against this attempt by the settler movement that was working with legal mechanisms within the state to displace people from their homes. I mean, this is a crisis that's ongoing there. But I basically find myself there one night in front of this home where a Palestinian family had been displaced by settlers who stole their home. And I find myself on the street with this family as we watch armed settlers walking in and out of their house. The house is draped in Israeli flags, it's draped in settler slogans, and Nasser, who's the father of this family, points up to the flag and he says to me, you see that flag? That flag represents so much strength to me. That flag to me, I feel like that flag could crush me in an instant. And in that moment, like, the whole paradigm for me was flipped on its head. Because for me, the Israeli flag did represent strength, but it also represented vulnerability, because I was raised on this story of Jewish weakness and Jewish trauma, and the flag was something that represented kind of like my own protection and safety. And all of a sudden, here I am standing here with this man who is being oppressed by that flag, and who literally had his home stolen by people who are now draping his house in the flag. And I mean, really, like, that's the moment my whole world was basically flipped upside down. I went and tried to get somebody to help me understand what I had just seen. I went to this journalist who I thought would help me make sense. And he just looks at me and shakes his head and said, you know, I drive past that neighborhood every day on my way to work and I try not to look. Here I am, 18, 19, I'm 18. And, no, I was 19. And like, for me, I'm looking straight at this thing, and the people in my life who I trust to help me make sense of it are actively looking away. I mean, for a young person who's like looking for answers, that was probably the most unsatisfying answer I could have possibly received, and it really pushed me and catalyzed kind of the journey that I've been on for the last 15 years, because I began to understand very quickly as I was like looking for answers from people I trusted within my own community that they did not actually want to talk about the things that I was seeing, and once I had seen them, I couldn't unsee them. And that, I mean, I could tell you like a dozen versions of that story, right? Of going to see some horror on the ground in Palestine and just wanting someone to help me like rationalize it, like tell me why this makes sense or it's okay. And like the thing is, it doesn't make sense and it's not okay. And they don't want to, they can't justify it.
So I mean, any journey of discovery, right, it involves like 2 points. So the point is you're trying to figure out, you're looking for answers, and you know, you don't have to go into more examples. I mean, we may end up going into more examples of when you sort of uncovered something and your paradigm flipped further. But the other process, you look for allies, right? You look like who, like, so I'm discovering this, so the journalist who kind of tells you looks away is like kind of an ally in that moment. They're like, I'm on your side, but they're not like an ally yet, because they're not gonna join you in some sort of movement, or they're not close to you in a sense that maybe they become close to you, but they're not close to you in the sense that they are your family or your friends who now agree with you. They're like, you're right, this is a problem, I agree with you, or maybe you found people who already, you know, were further along sort of in the journey of discovery than you are. So what's the process of then finding allies? And then eventually you sort of start IfNotNow, which is a movement, a group, an organization which is, you know, committed to anti-Zionism and pushing for, you know, Palestinians to have more greater sort of humanity and respect and dignity. And so how do you find allies?
Well, I don't know if this is what you were getting at, but I think for me what just immediately came up when you said that is that, like, so part of the thing that's really hard to unlearn is that one of the values that I was raised with was like the value of Jewish unity, right? So I desperately want to figure this out inside my own community. I don't want to have to air the dirty laundry. I don't want to have to.
Is that how you feel now, or how you felt then?
That's how I felt then, okay. Right? I'm like, I'm devoted to my community. I'm seeing these things that are really disturbing to me, and I mean, does anybody else here like know about? I mean, initially it was like so naive on my part. I was just like, guys, do you know about this thing that's going on? Like, you must not know, because, you know, we're good people. You're a good person. I mean, maybe if I let people know about this thing I'm seeing, then we'll all want to take it on together. And so initially it was like really, really earnestly about just trying to open up that conversation inside my own community. And that's, you know, one of the things that we used to say about, or one of the things that I saw about a lot of the young people who got politicized as I did, is that the place that it started was actually about a search for dialogue. It's like intellectually curious young people who are just looking for a place to have a conversation, and then you try to just have the conversation inside the community institutions, and the conversation gets shut down, right? And then that process of being...
How is it being shut down, like in community institutions?
So I'll give you an example. So when I was a college, so I go to Sheikh Jarrah. It's like heartbreaking to me. I meet this group of activists who are part of this local solidarity movement, and we invite them to come speak at my Hillel at UC Berkeley and the Jewish Student Center, right? And he's like a good Israeli boy, whatever. Like, he comes to speak in my Hillel, and right-wing students from the pro-Israel group show up with cameras. And they sit in the room and they just film us. And they're like, this is subversive speech that is happening in this building, and we are going to record it. And then that summer, they sent a report to Hillel International, alleging that we were bringing all this like anti-Israel speech into the building and that we should be kicked out. And that if we weren't kicked out, then the Hillel should be punished for even having us there. And they wrote all these different hit pieces on us that the speaker had said something to the effect of like, I love my city, I want Jerusalem to be a symbol of, I don't remember the exact language he used, but he said something to the effect of like, I want Jerusalem to be a symbol of coexistence and of peace and not a symbol of oppression and hate or something like that. And then the headline becomes, J Street U brings a speaker that says Jerusalem is a symbol of hate or whatever. Guess what? There is a lot of hate in Jerusalem and a lot of oppression, right? But again, they just they reduce it and they take it out of context and they sensationalize it. So a lot of things like that. And again, I'm trying to just have this conversation in my community and I'm getting attacked in all these ways. And so that was really already quite radicalizing because it was like, wait, we can't work together at all. And then the other thing that I think is one of the final breaking points for me was my senior year of college. So actually my whole college career was kind of bookended by these divestment campaigns that happened on campus. And my senior year, there was another divestment bill put forth in the student government, and again, I'm on a political journey here, and I think I've learned my lesson from the last time, and so what I try to do is say, instead of a divestment bill, what if we put forth a call to the student government to say that they support the two-state solution and want to work towards an end to the occupation or whatever. And I tried to get the other kind of pro-Israel groups within Hillel to sign on to that. And basically the idea was the way we can stop divestment is to show that the Jewish community, I'm putting quotes here because these are not things I agree with anymore, but to show that we believe in peace and in changing something. And we don't think divestment is a strategy to do that, but we think that there are other strategies. And I was in a meeting with the leaders of the other student groups, and they said, we're not putting our name on something that says occupation. We're not putting our names on anything that tarnishes Israel's image. And that was one of those just very clarifying moments for me where I realized that I had been trying to maintain this idea of unity, and actually what it meant that I was doing was that I wasn't, this is all a way of going to your question about allies, I should have been on the pro-divestment side, right? I should have been helping the students trying to pass the divestment bill. If my goal is ending the occupation and is achieving a vision of justice for Palestinians and Israelis, I should be part of the movement that's actually trying to exert pressure to change something. And unfortunately, I was on the wrong side, and I ended up being part of this attempt to stymie it, but using more liberal talking points than we'd used before. And it was a really devastating experience for me, honestly, to see that the students even used some of the talking points that we had written for them, students more to our right, while still then saying, oh, we support two states, da-da-da. And I mean, this was all part of the process for me of what I would call the end of my liberal Zionism and the end of these illusions that, and realizing how much all this rhetoric about the two-state solution and the peace process was actually a mask that allowed people to say they were doing something while not actually doing anything, and getting in the way of movements that actually could put pressure and move us towards some kind of consequences and some kind of situation that could help shift the situation on the ground.
You said sort of the end of your liberal Zionism, right? And that's where my brain was going as well. I think the 5th to 6th interview I did was with Ilan Pape, and he talked about how this genocide is going to definitely, it's the end of liberal Zionism, because you realize that, you can't be a nice guy or a nice woman or a nice person and be okay, we're just going to commit genocide or occupy. You can't be a nice occupier. There's no way to be a nice occupier. I guess many people go through something similar to what you've mentioned, but then they do get stuck in liberal Zionism. And I can understand why. It's because it's very difficult for any human being to start off saying, I'm actually going to start actively resisting my childhood, resisting my upbringing, resisting, my community, and stand against that. I mean, that's just a difficult thing for any human in any society at any time to do. You did make that leap, and you said, okay, I need to be on the divestment side. What's that journey like? Like, how do you actually go and do that? And then what has it been like since? And then we'll start talking about the present. Maybe.
Well, I mean, again, like, as you kind of said, it's like an ongoing process, right? One moment that comes to mind for me is, I would say both the summer of 2014 and the summer of 2020, 2021, because both of those summers we saw uprisings for racial justice in America and uprisings on the ground in Israel-Palestine. And one of the things, if we talk about liberal Zionism, one of the kind of myths that I think is like part of that ideology or belief system is this idea that if we just deal with the occupation, there's a good Israel and a bad Israel, right? And you can separate these things, and we don't have to talk about the Nakba, and we don't have to talk about 1948. And for me, I remember kind of like the Black Lives Matter movement and the way that they articulated an analysis of the kind of historical crimes that needed to be rectified in the US, talking about the foundations of white supremacy, the legacy of slavery and all that. Listening to that movement and like really believing what those activists were saying and reading and learning then forced me again to grapple with it's not the same issues, but it's the same thought process and belief systems that if I'm thinking about like the need to grapple with historical justice and the kind of like founding issues that continue to like the rot of injustice that persists across decades, that's what this conversation about the Nakba is, right? And you can't separate these things. So that was like, I mean, I think in some ways like the Nakba and just like grappling with that, the legacy of 1948 is perhaps the hardest thing for so many liberal Zionists to face.
When you start learning about the Nakba and you have at the time those discussions within your Jewish community about it, and there's some people who are in denial about it, there's people who are aware of it but kind of want to minimize it, there's others who may know more about it than you. What's that like?
Okay, can I flip this back on you for a
Absolutely.
second? So you grew up in South Africa, right?
Yes, I did.
So what did you know about Israel growing up?
Okay, so I grew up in South Africa, but I share the dual privilege of being a South African and a Muslim. And so in 1987, when the Intifada started, I mean, my parents, my family, people around me were speaking about, the Palestinian child throwing a stone against an Israeli Merkava tank. At the time, I just thought it was a tank. And that kind of is seared into your brain. And at the same time, stories of my mother being at the bus stop and being afraid of being chased by a bunch of white boys and being beaten up, and my dad facing similar things, just like randomly, because they were definitely, by no means were my parents at the sharpest edge of what apartheid gave the people of South Africa. But I mean, I grew up with racism all around me. It was very ingrained. It's still ingrained in many parts of South Africa, even though we are grappling with coming to sort of a new dispensation. So in my mind, Israel was this, I wouldn't use just the word settler colony as like a 7-year-old, but it was just like South Africa. It was this place where there were Jews who had privileges and Palestinians don't. And I didn't understand that there was a difference, and at the time there wasn't much of a difference between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip that becomes more sort of enshrined in 2005. But I didn't know, that there were two states and these were the borders, whatever. There's a country over there. I always used to be told it's quite small. It's like smaller than a national park we have in South Africa. That's what was described to me. And it was also like in loaded religious terms. It's Jews versus Muslims. That was also there. But I mean, in my own family, and I can't say it's the same for all Muslim families in South Africa, but it was much more about there's Israelis who have privileges like the white people in South Africa used to have or have, and there's Palestinians who don't, and it's really hard. And then as I got older, it was like I realized there was stolen land and occupied land and all that kind of stuff. Like I didn't know about house demolitions, and I don't know about, but the idea that there was a privileged class of people over there and an unprivileged class, as we have in South Africa, that's what I knew.
Okay, so this is super interesting. I feel like you and I could derail this whole interview of us just
No,
kind of
it's
going
fine,
back and
it's
forth
fine.
with
No,
some of this.
There's no derailing, because this is part of the
No,
issue.
I just
Yeah,
mean like, I think that this, like, so it's like the context that we grew up in shapes so much of
Yes.
like how we understand the world. So like, for me, what I knew about the Second Intifada is like the bus bombings, right?
I can see
and,
that, yes.
You know, I was 10 when 9/11 happened, and you know, as you know, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was not Prime Minister at the time, but he's like a very important person in the kind of like global war on terror discourse. And so I grew up in the U.S., like my kind of formation as a kid is in the U.S., understanding that Israel and America are both at war with terrorists. And the terrorists want to kill me and people like me. And that's the kind of framework that I'm growing up in. And yeah, I mean, I'm like and then like, I would say there's like a second story within that, which is like, you know, America had the civil rights movement. It's like it's the liberal American story, which is like, we had the civil rights movement in the US. There's like still this ongoing struggle for civil rights, but mostly like we kind of dealt with the problems, and you know, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and yeah, they've got some minorities, but minorities have rights, kind of like in America, and we don't really go into it so much. So, and then like on top of all that, then you get told there are these people out there who hate us and want to kill us, and they're going to use all these words and ideas that are meant to kind of like undermine and delegitimize your existence. So like, I think probably before I even knew the word apartheid, I knew that there was like this allegation of apartheid. Right? I didn't even know what it meant. For me, there was like this moment in college where I'm in this dialogue group, and there's this Israeli anti-Zionist grad student who's writing about the Nakba, and I say to him, you know, when you use words like apartheid and ethnic cleansing, like I feel under attack because those are words that are meant to delegitimize Israel. And he's like, well, can I like explain to you what those words mean? And I remember at the time, I mean, he was such an amazing teacher, frankly, and he very calmly explained to me that like ethnic cleansing is a factual description of what happened in 1948. And like, I know that sounds, I mean, I was extremely ignorant, but it's not just like an ignorance that you can kind of just fill in with information. It's an ignorance that is kind of covered up by justifications and explanations, and you first have to peel those things away before you can even intake new information.
No, of course. So what was like sort of, so then finding now allies, finding people, I guess, in the Jewish community or maybe outside the Jewish community, but now that are on the same page as you, they're like, liberal Zionism is not an answer. We need to kind of be part of what you said was a divestment campaign, or we need to be part of a movement that's dismantling what Israel is as an occupier, right? I mean, is that
sure,
exactly?
Yeah.
Sure. What's that like? Like starting IfNotNow, getting, you know, meeting familiar people, want to make a movie called Israelism. Maybe you don't know what it's going to be called at the time, but what's the activism like? Once you be like, I now see this as an important part of my mission and my life. What does that mean for you?
I guess there's like two separate things. So like the first thing is you do become kind of an exile in your own community, because like once, I mean, for me, 2014 was really about a realization that like there was no way to do this within the Zionist Jewish institutions, right? And so IfNotNow began by protesting outside of the offices of the Anti-Defamation League, holding a Jewish mourning ritual, and very clearly saying like, this is our tradition, we're going to use the ritual tools that we have within our own tradition to express our grief and mourning, but we're not doing it inside these institutions anymore, and we're going to make them reckon with us. I mean, have they reckoned? There's a lot to say about that. But then I think the second thing is, and there's, I mean, I guess I'll just say along with that, it's like a very painful process of being exiled from your community. It strains relationships. It means you just like, I mean, there's like a whole communal infrastructure. It means you're no longer welcome in if you are going to be public with your politics. And then the other thing that happens is you experience like the broader world that's out there, right? And that part has been, I mean, for me, like a deeply moving and transformative part, because I think one of the ways that Zionism as an ideology really keeps people inside is by promoting this fear of the other. And so there's always this rhetoric of all these different types of like, the community outside can't be trusted, you aren't safe, other people don't know the truth, you know, if you're not with your people, you will be unsafe. And I mean, it sounds like maybe cheesy or simple to say that, but it has been like truly profound to like unlearn that. And to, I mean, in New York, I'm a board member of an organization called Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. It's an organization that for 40 years has been part of local justice struggles in the city. Actually, it was founded in the 90s when Nelson Mandela came to New York City and he was boycotted by the American Jewish establishment, and a group of Jews in New York City said, we actually want to welcome him. And he was boycotted, of course, because of his support for Palestinian rights. Yeah. And this group of Jews said, that's like so offensive to us. We support the movement to end apartheid. We're gonna host an event to welcome him in New York City. And that was actually the founding of a group that ends up being part of all these different struggles in New York City for racial and economic justice, is also part of the group that helped just elect our new mayor, Zohran Mamdani. And so there is, and it's very much part of this like counter tradition of Jews who see themselves very much as part of like a broader movement for justice. And that is very dangerous to Zionism. And it's been, yeah, I'm just repeating myself at this point.
No,
but
that's fine. So it sounds like a very, very basic question, right? Because, I mean, it often is used as a, you know, if I was asking this to someone who's trying to prove they're not a white racist, then it'd be like, do you have any black friends, right? So it's not one of those questions. But when do you start having substantial relationships with Palestinians who are now your allies? Because they're also obviously pushing for, you know, divestment and sanctions against Israel. And what is that journey like? And I'm asking it because obviously they coming from it from a different place. And on the Palestinian side, there's different shades as well. There's people who sort of, you know, are fine with a two-state solution. There's those who find that very bad and want a one-state solution. There's people who may have more radical ideas. There's a whole host of different people who have usually very sound, articulate reasons behind why they want to kind of push for the solution or the vision of Palestine, Israel, or just Palestine, or whatever it's going to be called, that land between the river and the sea, right? So when you start engaging Palestinians, and I'm guessing you make really good relationships with them, because in many instances, they become, in some instances, your primary allies, and there's some members of the Jewish community who are still primary allies, and maybe some who are neither Palestinian or Jewish. But when you start engaging Palestinian ideas on this, what's that like for you?
I mean, this actually really directly connects to the previous question, which is just like, again, about this idea of kind of trust and belonging. Like from the moment I began questioning and engaging, there have been Palestinians who have welcomed me, engaged with me, wanted to speak with me. I mean, you know, of course, the rhetoric that, I mean, anti-Palestinian racism is so rampant, particularly in the US, that most Palestinians I've actually met, both on the ground and in the US, are so like grateful and like just like eager for the opportunity to dispel those myths. And again, contrary to the messages that are often propagated in my community that say things like, you know, to be welcomed in the pro-Palestinian movement, you have to like disavow your whole family and community, blah, blah, blah. I've been able to have really deep, meaningful conversations with Palestinians about the journey that I've been on. Every single, I mean, it's hard to give almost one specific story because like,
yeah, of course.
I mean, my whole time spending, like ever since I began this journey, there have been Palestinians that I've met who have welcomed me into their homes in every city and every village, like across historic Palestine that I've been able to visit, and who have just been like eager to show me their reality and grateful for the truth telling that we do in our communities.
Okay, so in the last 2 years, I'm guessing I'm guessing with lots of confidence in my guess that the movement of Jews who are now realizing what Israel is about and standing against it has grown. And because we're seeing this on our screens, we're seeing more and more protests. We're also seeing a crackdown against that community, not just by their own community, but by security officials and officers and policemen. What has that been like? What has Jewish activism in the US specifically, where you're based, been like for you in the last 2.5 years, while your community is also grappling with the awful crimes of Israel?
Well, I think what I would just say, and this goes back to like Israelism was created many years before October 7th. It launched a year before October 7th. There's already been this battle underway, right? This kind of generational rebellion. There was a polling done in 2021 that said over 25% of American Jews broadly believed that Israel was an apartheid state, and the number was much higher for Jews under the age of 30. So this is like a massive shift that's already underway. That polling also showed that a similar number kind of understood Israel's oppression of Palestinians as comparable to America's oppression of minorities. And so that was already happening, and there was already this attempt to repress it. I would say after October 7th, we saw kind of two parallel processes underway. I think there was one part of the community that retreated in a very significant way, just like the crimes of October 7th were so shocking and horrific, and they felt that they had to be in solidarity with Israelis. And Israeli society, as we know, moved radically to the right. And so anybody for whom solidarity first and foremost with Israelis was their kind of primary driver, like moved way to the right along with them, frankly. Unfortunately, there was this like movement, it was called the kind of the judicial protest movement that was kind of trying to stop the right-wing government from trying to advance certain plans to change the laws that actually were about deepening Israeli apartheid, but the protest movement didn't really talk about that. They just talked about the ways that they were going to trample on their rights. But unfortunately, we had many liberal rabbis in the US who had been really outspoken allies of that protest movement, who said, this Israeli government is the most extremist government in Israel's history. True. This Israeli government is authoritarian and is trying to trample on democracy. Also true. And then after October 7th, they fully threw their lot in with the kind of broader public that then trusted that government to kind of wage a so-called just war in Gaza. And so that's kind of where the Jewish mainstream went. And then on the other hand, there were those of us who were, I would say, paying attention to the worsening conditions on the ground, listening very directly to Palestinians, and listened to what Palestinians had to say about what was going to happen after October 7th. I mean, anybody who, if you're a person who's been following events on the ground, you know that for every Israeli killed, there's going to be exponentially more Palestinians killed. That is Israeli government policy. And so, I mean, it's a painful thing to admit, but the moment that I saw the October 7th numbers, before I could even process that horror in and of itself, I was already doing the equations in my head of what does that mean for the decimation of Gaza that's to come? And I mean, and then I didn't have to imagine it because it began almost immediately, right? So, yeah, for those of us, I think, who had already a foundation to kind of make sense of some of that, we were immediately, I mean, I was part of a group of people that was protesting at the White House within a week, saying, do not let a genocide unfold in Gaza. I mean, we heard the things that Israeli government officials were saying. We heard that evacuation warning for over 1 million people. We saw very clearly where this was going to go. We believed the threats of Israeli leaders. Again, if we're talking about what are the splits, in this camp, they're saying, oh, these are just angry men. That's just things they say, And we're like, no, they mean it. We know this is what they do, and we know this is what they're going to do. And then there's I think the other thing is for the even younger Jews who mostly get their information on social media, I mean, immediately, this live stream of the genocide begins. And for them, that is profoundly radicalizing. And then for young people who are on college campuses, I mean, there are all these campuses where the students tried to bring Israelism, just thinking this is like a harmless movie night. We want to have a conversation. We want to learn. And then, I mean, Jewish organizations from around the country were like organizing parents to send these mass emails to university administrations, tens of thousands of emails to university administrators asking them to cancel Israelism screenings. And so then you have young students, Jewish students, who are like, once again, as I was talking about before, like, we just want to host a movie night and dialogue, and then they get caught in this like major censorship scandal. And does that like freak them out? No, it actually galvanizes them to become more, what is this thing that they're not going to let me talk about? How can it be that bad? And so then all of a sudden, you know, they're doing like watch parties in the hallways of their dorm rooms. They're all like streaming it on their laptops. I mean, it ended up making the whole thing go much more viral.
No, I mean, I do want to start speaking about in a minute, not yet, about sort of American society and the Israeli and the Jewish community in America. Sort of, you know, how you feel about their resistance, their movement, the Democrats and the Republicans and MAGA. And I mean, we're now living in a world where Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens are articulate defenders of Palestinian rights and dignity, but at the same time hold political views which are problematic.
I would say more than problematic.
Very problematic.
Yes.
I mean, you know, have undertones of white supremacy, anti-Semitism as well. So we'll get all of that. But just to respond to, reflect over some of the things you said about knowing the Israeli sort of calculus. Yeah, no, I mean, the same. I remember actually when October 7th happened, I saw like the news in the morning, and I was not in news anymore. And so I had a project I was working on. And so I assumed this is like 50 people who have been killed, which is really bad, but like it's 50 people. And then 4 hours later, I was with a friend, and she said, well, the death count now is like 500 plus and counting. And you know, within a day or two, we knew it was 1,000, 1,100. First they said 1,400, it came down to 1,100, which immediately meant 100,000, right? Like in my mind, I was like, they're going to kill 100,000 people now. Even then, I thought that the ramifications of this will be 10 years, but they'll kill 100,000 people in 6 months. In many ways, we don't know the number. The number is at least, I think it's 68,000 or close to 80,000 is the full count, but I'm guessing it's a lot more people. But the destruction of all the homes, or like 90% of the homes, all the hospitals, not completely destroyed, but bombed, and many of them destroyed. Like in many ways, it's actually gone beyond that calculus. Just what's your reflection on that?
I think what I would say is that the Israeli government, the current look, I mean, Israel as a project is about displacing as many Palestinians as possible, concentrating them on as little land as possible, right? And settling as many Jews as possible on as much land as possible. And that has been the state project since 1948. I mean,
some would say before 1948.
Yeah, certainly. I mean,
yes.
But since the founding of the state, that has been the project. And in recent years, we've seen that project ramping up. I mean, like once again, if we're talking about, you know, our different viewpoints, like while the Israeli protest movement is talking about the threats to their own democracy, 2023 was the deadliest year for Palestinians in the West Bank. Before even October 7th. The Israeli military basically killed someone almost every single day. And this Israeli government was never going to miss the opportunity to use October 7th to advance the vision that it already had of consolidating its control over as much land as possible, and again, removing as many Palestinians from it as possible. So I think, again, like if you knew that that was the goal and the mindset of this government, you had to take it seriously and take seriously, I mean, what it would do to exploit that tragedy. I mean, it failed to, like, there's the whole conversation about security failure of October 7th, how that even could have happened in the first place, how they ignored all of the warnings and all the security intel that they had, how that was able to happen. Of course, they're also still like repressing any kind of like state inquiry into that information, because obviously if the citizens knew what happened on that day, they would be even more outraged at their government. But at the same time, they exploited the tragedy from the first moment. whipped up as much fear as possible, not just in Israel, but in Jewish communities around the world. This is a trauma that happened to you. This is the Holocaust happening again. And these are Nazis, and we have to go fight them. I mean, these are the words that they use, right? Human animals and Nazis are like the two main ideas that they're using. And again, it's like, if you kind of understood that, then you can understand what's happening. And still, it has been at levels of horror beyond what any of us could have imagined, because no government in the world has been willing to stand up and do anything to stop it. There has been absolutely no red line that the Israeli government can cross that will mean anything for any foreign government. I mean, the fact that they're all still sending them weapons, it's like, it's just absolutely outrageous. And it is such a, I mean, it's such an indictment of our whole international system that like this has been able to happen for the last 2 years.
You speak about the Jewish community, right? Specifically the Jewish community on the left in the last 2.5 years, as they've been grappling with protest and movements and I guess their own response to this. What's their journey been like? And what's your critiques, if you have any, of that community?
Well, I guess the first thing I'll just say is I think the Jewish left was in an interesting and complex position, like immediately after October 7th. Of course, like again, being part of a community that actually is like directly connected to people who were impacted, and I actually mean Israelis and Palestinians at this point, right? I mean, for those of us who come from Jewish communities that are connected to Israelis, I think there was a real desire that like we only mourn our own people, right? I can say for myself, already from October 8th, I knew Palestinians who were killed, or Palestinians who had family members who were being killed. So for me, there was never any way to kind of like draw that line of like who my people are. And again, that's when we go back to the things that like the community considers a betrayal, that's part of that story. So initially, like, I mean, I can say like IfNotNow, the organization I helped found, like hosted vigils for people to just like come and grieve in public for the loss of life that was just so massive and so immediate, and to grieve that loss of life while also saying very unequivocally, we are against our grief being weaponized to justify a genocide. That was always the messaging from the beginning. As I also mentioned, there were these like mass mobilizations that we helped organize. IfNotNow, Jewish Voice for Peace was and is the main organization that has organized the mass mobilizations and kind of at this point, like the most iconic protest visuals that you've seen, that people across the world have seen. The major arrest action in the Capitol building in Grand Central in New York. There have been, shutdowns of bridges and streets. I mean, it's just like everywhere. So that's been like one of the things that the Jewish left is doing, which is just like making as visible as possible that Jews, the massive number of Jews who do not consent to the genocide and who are standing arm in arm with Palestinians and with this broader, you could call it anti-war movement, ceasefire movement, whatever, that was a multiracial and multi-faith movement against the genocide. And the Jewish presence there has always been very, very visible. And unfortunately, like, because of, again, like the politics of Holocaust memory in the West and the way that the way that Jews are invoked to justify support for Israel, the Jewish presence in that movement is very important, and we, again, for better and for worse, our voices are listened to by a lot of people and valued more. But then, like, honestly, like, the reason I'm kind of, I don't know how to answer this question so well is because, like, when I just think about the movement that I'm part of and, like, what people have been up to over the last 2 years, it's, like, everything. It's, protecting freedom of speech at universities, Jewish professors who are organizing to kind of protect the space for critical inquiry at their university, protecting Palestinian students and others and colleagues and all the people who have faced this incredible repression and crackdown, again, in the name of fighting anti-Semitism, right? Then you have in communities across and again, then it goes from universities to elementary school. I mean, there has been the thing that's scary and amazing, I guess, about this moment is that, like, the scary thing is that the repression of pro-Palestinian speech and activism has basically permeated like almost every institution possible. And then the thing that's, I think, beautiful and interesting in that is then you're seeing people who've been galvanized to become activists in every corner of their communities. Elementary schools, community organizations, and then so there's like the protection and the fighting back against the repression, and then there's like divestment campaigns or boycott campaigns, and there's ceasefire resolutions. There were municipal ceasefire resolutions around the country. There have been, there's honestly like so much, it's like hard to remember all the different things that have been happening. And then of course there's like the intercommunal stuff, which is like people trying to have those conversations with their families, with their rabbis, with their communities, film screenings, learnings, people trying to make space to host speakers, fundraisers for food aid and fundraisers for Palestinian families. I mean, there's like, the crisis feels so all-encompassing at this point that it's like hard to actually summarize it.
Okay. What I want to kind of explore is actions versus ideas, right? So there's lots of actions, and they all.
So you're going to push me on the ideas now.
Absolutely,
okay.
Hopefully useful, right? But in terms of ideas, because people on the Jewish left, I'm assuming, already are aware that Israel, there's something about the Nakba in there. They may be more informed or more uninformed about it. They're aware that there's apartheid. They may be more informed or more, firm in their belief that there's definitely apartheid, or they may be like there's some sort of apartheid in there. It's people who are probably just beyond liberal Zionism, but maybe still have elements of liberal Zionism in there, right? But there has to have also been an ideological journey, and I'm sure it's different for different people. There are also, for example, like Miko Pellet, for example, who's almost pro-resistance. Not pro, he's definitely pro-resistance, right? If you hear him speak, for example. So what's been the ideological change or movement or discussions been like?
I'm not trying to avoid your question.
No, I
maybe I'm trying to avoid it a little bit, but I do think that the immediacy of the crisis has been, it kind of transcends ideology in some ways. Like for what I've at least witnessed, like in the movements that I'm part of, is that like it really is a question of like, do you want to stop the genocide right now or not? And if you want to stop the genocide, there's kind of a certain set of actions and policy positions that you would support. So like, for example, stopping the transfer of weapons to Israel, right? Ending military aid. That's like the kind of basic dividing, the support for accountability at international institutions, the ICJ case, the ICC. So if you support those things, that like makes you part of the movement against the genocide and for justice and freedom in that land. And if you're not in favor of those kind of basic measures of accountability, then to me, you're not in the movement, because you can say whatever you want to say, but if you're not actually, and again, that goes back to the story I told you about my university days, is like, I understood that like, I could say whatever I wanted, and that's all well and good, but if you're not actually willing to support anything that could like make those ideas a reality, then you're just posturing or whitewashing your own image, or shooting and crying, as they say. So what I've experienced much more is like, it's not to say that those ideological conversations aren't happening, they're really happening, but I don't know really how to parse those for you.
Okay. No, that's fine. I think so you said anyone who is against the military transfer of stuff from the USA and their aid, I guess, to Israel, and those who would want international accountability. And I can see why that's a very intelligent, broad-based umbrella position to take. May I ask why the line, and it doesn't have to be not for the broader movement, I think that makes sense because you want a broad-based, broader movement, but why not anyone who believes in sanctions? Why wouldn't the line go further? Like complete sanctions against Israel? International sanctions, as there was against South Africa?
I suppose I'm maybe speaking about this from like a very U.S.-centric perspective, because like I think.
No, but even for the US, it's like if they completely sanction, I don't see this happening anytime soon.
Well, that's it. So like, I think I am supportive of sanctions, and I think a lot of people in the movement are supportive of
complete
sanctions. Yeah, but it's and many of us are supportive, I was part of this initiative. I signed this letter that was signed by Jewish like celebrities or whatever, or Jewish community leaders from around the world that like says that sanctions have to be part of this like global call for accountability and consequences. So yeah, I would say that is part of it. I was being kind of like reductive.
No, of course. What's the conversations like between those who are all military sanctions and international accountability, and those who are like you, who are like all sanctions across the board? Israel should be treated as a pariah state until it changes its policies. Because that must be very interesting conversations.
Again, like, to me, the conversations that feel like I'm part of a little bit more, or that feel a little bit more like politically urgent in the U.S. is the conversation between those who say, don't boycott, don't sanction, engage with Israeli society, and those of us who say, like, change is not going to come from within. And that's, like, I think
okay, so that's how you see the divide. It's like people who are trying to lobby Israeli society or work with them or activists within it, and I guess you're saying it's like those have given up on society and like some change, and you need to have pressure and no change.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say like giving up on the society entirely. I would say like understanding that the mechanisms of change, there is not a sizable enough constituency within that society that can actually make change within its own systems, and the change is going to have to come from outside, and that's something that I think a lot of the Israeli activists that I see myself allied with, again, they're like 5% of the population, but they would agree with that statement, right? Because, I mean, we've seen that Israeli society, by and large, has not just supported, but actively taken part in a genocide.
Okay. So, I mean, I think the next sort of place you want to get to in the conversation, and I'm just going to, like, it's almost like buzzwords, right? So it's Candace, Owens, Tucker Carlson, Mamdani, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, anti-Semitism, right?
All the guys, sure, yeah.
I mean, I don't even know where to start with all of that, but I guess the place to start is, how do you feel, for example, when you see, just very recently, probably a few days after the Doha Forum ended, I'm not sure if you saw all of it, but Tucker Carlson gone on like a 50-minute rant.
I haven't watched it yet.
Okay, but I mean, in it, he visits a Palestinian refugee center, I wouldn't call it, like in Doha, where he shows kids who have had severe injuries and lost limbs. He speaks about the absolute urgency for the USA to stop funding this completely. And then he then interviews arguably one of the most famous international lawyers right now in the world, Francesca Albanese, who's been one of the most articulate defenders of Palestinian rights and someone who is against Israel's legitimate actions. So when you see that, but yet you know that Tucker has sort of anti-immigrant, xenophobic, white supremacist, and what many people feel is anti-Semitic vibes as well. How do you feel?
I feel a lot of things. I mean, first of all, I will just say that I don't begrudge Francesca for doing that interview, because the sanctions against her are absolutely reprehensible, and I think that she needs whatever constituency in the U.S. can actually exert pressure to reverse those sanctions against her, which are unjust. Like, that should happen, and so I understand why she felt the need to speak to that audience that might actually be able to help change that policy.
I don't think she's just speaking to them to help change her personal. I think she's actually trying to convince them, like she's actually speaking across the bridge. It's broader than just her own struggles.
That is true, and I do think, look, I'll say that I think the divisions that are kind of happening within the right over Israel are interesting and fascinating and sometimes quite fun to watch when they're really fighting with each other. The Jewish right has made their bed with anti-Semites, right? I mean, the Jewish right, and I include in that, I think there's like different considerations here for the Israeli right and the American Jewish right, but by and large, they made a decision that they are going to ally with forces around the world who love Israel because it is a racist, authoritarian, repressive state, And that means, like, you know, on the global stage, that's what the alliance with Modi and Orban and all these guys are about. And in the U.S., that is also what the alliance with the MAGA movement has been about. And it's pretty interesting to see, like, some of those things cracking apart. That said, for me, there's absolutely, like, no question that the anti-Israel movement within MAGA, these people are not my allies. I haven't gone to watch the interview with Tucker, but I just noticed, like, the first link, or at least one of the links that he had on the YouTube page was, like, a fundraiser for, like, some anti-abortion company. I mean, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, these kind of right-wing media figures are part of some of the most nefarious forces within American society that on every single level, for me, like, as a human being, as a woman, as a progressive person, like, everything that they want to see happening in the world is so, like, inimical to, like, what I want to see happen in the world. And for me, my commitment to Palestinian freedom is about a consistent commitment to, like, human dignity and equality across the board. It's about, like, safety and liberation for Palestinians, but also for me as a Jewish person. And it's a part of a vision of a world of, like, justice and equality that I want to live in. I do not think that is what these people's and I say anti-Israel because I don't actually think they are pro-Palestinian. I don't think they are pro-Palestinian human rights. I think they are anti-Israel because they think that Israel is this, like, basically, like, Jewish parasite on America. I mean, I'm being really reductive here, but it's not about just a genuine commitment to, like, human rights and equality for all people. And so I again, like, there's like good reasons for those like debates and those fractures to happen in that movement, and that's good, and I would like to see that continue, but I do not see those people as my allies.
Okay. Do you see, and I agree with a lot of what you said, but maybe you don't see them as your allies, but do you see the usefulness of that rhetoric in terms of how it potentially leads to a USA which doesn't fund Israel's war crimes?
Yes.
And so how do you strike that balance then?
As I said, I'm like, I would like MAGA to continue eating itself alive over all of its divisions. That I'm not here to work
Okay, so it's
with
like
them.
continued this, but like when the time comes where we need to hold hands and walk together, then you're gonna need to change a bunch more views before I do that.
I don't really see it. I mean, I don't really see it as like holding hands and walking together. Like,
Okay.
I think it is a fact that, look, across the board in the U.S. right now, we are seeing, and across the world, of course, like we've seen people a massive sea change in public opinion against Israel, right? People around the world have watched the genocide, they're horrified, they do not want their countries and their governments funding this thing. They are experiencing the repression in their own countries, they do not understand, like, why they are being silenced, right, in the name of protecting this foreign government. Now, what Candace Owens is offering to her listeners to explain the things that I just said is that there is this, like, nefarious, pedophilic, billionaire Jewish cabal that, I mean, insert other conspiracy terms, right, that is like running our country behind the scenes, and part of their project is Israel. And the vision, again, it's like the understanding of like how the world works that she is offering to her listeners is completely detached from reality, and it is dangerous. And so I'm not, I think that and again, this goes back to this conversation about like accountability in my own community is like, I mean, it's genuinely crazy making for me as a Jewish leftist, as a person who says like my commitment to Palestinian freedom again is about the world that I want to live in. I believe that a world in which Palestinians are safe and free is also a world in which Jewish people will be safer and better off. Like this isn't just rhetoric, this is like what I genuinely believe. And basically, I think part of the danger that that the Jewish establishment just simply appears not to see, because they are so committed to protecting Israel and its genocide from consequences, is that they're also enabling these forces. Like that Candace Owens is able to say, look at this Jewish billionaire class that's trying to silence you and take away your rights. And they are like, basically like affirming, you know, these conspiracies that she's putting forth. Like, again, that is bad for anti-Semitism, as it is also bad for like all these other things. So I feel like I'm not being so articulate about this, but I guess I'll just quote something that was said on a podcast that Jewish Currents put out recently, or just from some people that I trust, which is like, these are some of the conversations that are happening inside the Jewish community, inside the Jewish left, is like, the anti-Zionism could mean, I suppose, like what Candace and Tucker are putting forth. But what we are trying to put forth is an anti-Zionism that at its core is about like being against supremacy and for justice and dignity for all people. That is not what they are about. And so I think there's also this battle now about like what kind of what this there is, I would say, like in some ways like a battle about like what this movement for accountability for Israeli crimes could look like. And again, the more that there is repression against the left, the more at this point it's also giving more power to the right. Okay.
I mean, just one more pushback on this before we start talking about the Democrats, right? Because I actually agree with a lot of what you're saying. It's just I think, and this is why I'm pushing back, because I think these are ideas we're all still grappling with, right? But earlier on you said the sort of the umbrella body is people agree that Israel should not be militarily aided in arms and in other ways to destroy Palestinian life, and want international accountability. I disagree with many things with Candace and Tucker, but I do think they fit into that umbrella body, just based on those two things. I do think they want international accountability for Israeli leadership, and I do think they don't want the US to support Israel and its crimes.
Well, so that's where we go, I guess, back to the question of ideology. Like, again, I'll quote my friend, the Palestinian activist Fadi Quran, who recently, like, I heard him speak about the idea that, like, the movement that we are part of right now is against that the ongoing Nakba, this destruction of Palestinian society and land and people, is the animating policy of the Israeli government, of the Israeli state project. And what our movement has to be about is against anybody for whom those ideologies and policies are kind of driving them, right? And again, I do not think that the MAGA anti-Israel movement is animated by a vision of being against racial supremacy. This is a racial supremacist movement. They are animated by many other things. And again, like, we could go into a lot. Part of what is kind of interesting about what's happening on the right is there's the split about the Christian nationalists and the white nationalists, and who sees, you know, Israel as like an essential outpost for US imperialism versus like a Jewish parasite that is occupying the US government and, like, you know, taking all of our resources and controlling our politicians and whatever. But all of this is not, again, it's not about a question of, you know, international human rights, about systems of supremacy and racial domination. It's not about justice and dignity for all people. It's not about historical justice. Like, those are the questions that I think the movement that I am part of is animated by. Those people are not against, you know, like, I mean, again, I don't claim to be an expert on like what they support and believe in, but it's like, for me, these beliefs that I hold are comparable to my belief that we should have reparations for slavery in America. Last I checked, that is not what is animating them. So I think we're talking about like two completely separate things here. Again, when we're talking about like a movement to end military aid, sure, you end up having unlikely coalitions, but I do not see those people as like allies in the like ideological or political project that I'm part of.
Okay. The Democrats, right, as a community who is working as a Jewish community that's working against, you know, Zionism and the Israel project, where do you position yourself in terms of who you support, in terms of like these two big American parties? It can't be the Republicans, I'm assuming, based on what we just said, even though, you know, the Republican Party is not just Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, and, you know, and Biden is always says he's the biggest Zionist, and he sent Israel a record number of bombs to carry out a genocide. So, I mean, I guess this is a broader discussion that not just Jews are actually grappling with. But how do you see that? How do you see that discussion happening? And where do you think you need to kind of, on the bigger American political landscape, start putting your support to, or what's your tactics in that regard?
Well, I mean, it's actually because of everything that we just discussed that like this crisis in the Democratic Party about Israel is so urgent, because it's like it's so obvious that the Democrats' complete failure, or it's not just failure, the Democratic Party's active enabling of the Gaza genocide is what cost them, is one of the things I think that cost them the election, and is lending a ton of fuel to this right-wing anti-Israel movement. And I think, again, like if the and that is, I mean, that's what the uncommitted movement was about, right? Just saying like we need a candidate that's actually like against the genocide and for cutting military aid and all that. And that's also, I think, what is like quite hopeful about the election of Zohran Mamdani in New York City, right? That you had a candidate who is pro-Palestinian because of, again, like, and he is very, very clear whenever he speaks about this, that it is about his commitment to equality and justice for all people, that he is against any state that would discriminate on the basis of religion or race anywhere in the world. And that is like very deeply connected to his vision of like an affordable, inclusive New York City, and is what made people believe that he was actually somebody who could like stand up and fight for them, and that they could trust to like back those ideas that he was saying.
Why do you think Mamdani was able to say those things so clearly, and yet like AOC couldn't?
Well, it's really deep for him. Like, I mean, you probably know better than me, coming from South Africa.
But I mean, if you want me to retort to it, I will, but only after your answer.
No, I just think that it's like, I think it's deep and authentic for him, and I think what was really compelling for me to watch about him is that like so often you kind of see American politicians give these like, you could just see that they're these boilerplate rehearsed lines that some like lobbyist or consultant or whatever like told them to say, and you can tell that this is a guy who really knows his stuff. I mean, obviously, like he grew up in a context, again, as we discussed earlier, in which Palestinian freedom was like part of his understanding of the world and his commitments. And he was a student activist in college, as we know. And so he can't kind of be just like thrown off by these questions. Like, I mean, American politics just has this like minefield of questions that are meant to derail and intimidate candidates. And he's somebody who's just like ready, like he can't fall into those traps because he just knows it all too well.
I mean, but the thing is, like, so it's less that. I mean, I agree with you on Mamdani, but why was AOC not able to figure that out? Did you think she's just been in politics for too long and she become a boilerplate politician? Like, because I do think there was a time where AOC spoke very articulately about the equality of life and the fact that we're all in some universal struggle. Like, I mean, how did she get it wrong?
I don't want to get too deep into like what has gone on with her. I mean, I think like ultimately she still is one of the elected officials in Congress who has been actually the most outspoken on Palestinian freedom. I think what I'm trying to say is that first of all, we know that she was much less informed about these issues and has faced a ton of pressure from right-wing organizations that have really sought to pressure her. And I think because Zoran had a much like deeper, longer like commitment and understanding of the issues, I think he's a little bit more resilient to some of those like a kind of attempts to derail him. But I think it's also a testament to like how much stronger our movement still needs to be. And I think it'll be interesting to see like with him as an ally if it enables her to like stand stronger.
You know, I think I agree with you on all the identity sort of politics and the fact that he's informed and has a lot more familiarity with the issue and lived experience, etc. But I think
what I'm like part of what I'm trying to say is like if you don't know kind of the intricacies of how these loaded questions are, like the right to exist stuff, right? He knows that this is a trap, and so he knows how to answer it. And I mean, and he actually did even still kind of fall into the trap for a while at the beginning,
yeah.
But like the fact that he can just very clearly be like, I'm against any state that discriminates on the basis of race or religion, and that's like, he didn't have to like rehearse that because he knows it. That's what he actually believes.
No, but I also think because he was kind of like new, and at some point, I guess 5 months before he won the election, he didn't even know or 6
Right.
months, he didn't even know he had stood any chance. So I guess he felt there was nothing to lose. And when he did double down on Palestine, he saw it worked. And so I'm not trying to say he was using that. I think he was very sincere in his support for Palestine, and that's why he is so coherent on it. But I do think that I don't know, to me, Palestine, Israel isn't that complicated, and I know that may sound different, but I do have the history of being a South African and having, a very small way experienced apartheid, right? But I mean, I do think that AOC also may get it. She may not be as familiar, but I think the fact that she'd been in Congress for that long actually plays a role into it. Palestinian Resistance. As a person who is a Jew and someone who obviously you still have a place in your heart for a much more just Israel. How do you perceive and see and think about Palestinian resistance?
I'm not sure I would say that I still hold a vision of a just Israel in my heart.
Okay, that's good.
But that's not really what you asked. Look.
I mean, it kind of is, but we'll get to that later. Look,
the violence that Israel commits against Palestinians every day for decades is a violence that creates violence. And that in some ways is kind of like the beginning and the end for me of it. But I mean, I could just say that like, I spent a year working at an Israeli human rights organization called Gisha that does legal aid work to help, before October 7th was like helping Palestinians in Gaza navigate the permit regime. The organization's commitment is about freedom to movement. And I just saw like every single day stories of families who missed the wedding of a sister or a child and missed being able to be with their parents on their dying bed because one of them lived in Gaza and the other one lived in the West Bank or in Jaffa. And that like, this is a community that, again, just because of who they are, like the state's mission is to keep them apart, is to keep them fragmented, is to destroy their society and to deny them these like basic aspects of human existence that are so essential to like what does it mean to be a human and to have a family and a community. And Israeli apartheid is an attack on all of that. And again, like the March of Return in 2018, we saw people nonviolently marching by the fence and Israeli soldiers like shot them down like they were just playing a video game. And I'm not like, this is not like about endorsement or justifying, it's about trying to understand this kind of intense grinding oppression and denial of freedom. It is understandable why people have made the decision to choose violence in response to that.
No, I mean, South Africa, I mean, Mandela is known as the great peacemaker, but he was also probably the politician most responsible in the 1950s to get the ANC to adopt guns and take on guns. There's a big difference between the ANC's, not always, but their general resistance policy and Hamas, for instance. The ANC didn't always carry this out, but there was a stated policy of not killing civilians, whereas Hamas has not done that since the Second Intifada, or possibly before that. In terms of armed resistance, which is violent by nature of having arms, but not against civilians, I'm not asking for like, do you endorse or not endorse, but I mean...
I'm against violence against civilians.
Of course, no, obviously.
It would be dishonest to like look at this situation and not try to understand what are these conditions that have produced all of this violence. That's
okay.
it.
Earlier on, I incorrectly said that you may still hold a place in your heart for a just Israel, and you said you may not. How do you see, what do you think is a possible just solution? How do you, I mean, we don't know where it will go, but if you were given the power of Sykes-Picot or the entire UN or the US government or Benjamin Netanyahu, how would you resolve this problem?
Like, again, this isn't really my personal opinion. It's like, this is the opinion of like many of the policy experts and political leaders that I trust, and Palestinians and like international experts. What we have on the ground right now is an unjust, unequal one-state reality. I'm in favor of an equal one-state reality. That's like a personal opinion. I have seen the way that the two-state solution, the kind of like guise of the Oslo process, I think one of the enduring myths in American politics certainly, but perhaps in most Western countries, is this idea that there is this like just two-state solution that could be just around the corner. And it basically is, again, like the cover for governments to do absolutely nothing. They say they hope there will be a two-state solution one day, while Israel continues to quite explicitly and intentionally undermine any last prospect for the two-state solution. So recently they started building an E1, which was this like, you know, for decades was like, if they build an E1, it would be the death of the two-state solution. But here we go, like nobody's declaring that the two-state solution is dead. So I'm of the personal opinion that it's long dead, and that if there is any chance of like a just future in that land, it will be through giving equal rights and citizenship to all people, and engaging in some kind of process of like accountability in international institutions, accountability for the genocide and for all the other crimes, and processes of like reparations and restitutions for Palestinians for the decades of crimes that have been committed against them.
Okay, you may be aware of Yuval Noah Harari, a famous author, historian. He recently said that Judaism has had the biggest crisis it's faced since the sacking of the temple 2,500 years ago by the Babylonians has been this genocide. What's your reflections on that?
Yeah, I agree with him, but we draw very different conclusions from it. I mean, look, I think that the founding of the State of Israel obviously was like a radical transformation of Jewish history. I think the decision that has been made over many decades to kind of try to fuse the project of Zionism with the project of Judaism around the world has been a catastrophe. And I'm of the political camp that is trying to disentangle Judaism from Zionism so that Jewish people can be safe wherever we live around the world. We can be part of movements for justice wherever we live around the world, and also so that we can have some prospect for a just future in Palestine, Israel.
No, I mean, I actually agreed with what he said, but I disagreed with the date. I thought, dude, that was 1948.
Yeah, I don't remember the.
Yeah. No,
we'd have to rewatch the clip together.
It's more or less what you're saying, because I think he's saying, like, you all don't know how I said a few things, especially post October 7th, which were very unnerving, and quite frankly apologetic to genocide. But I think when he's saying it, when he says what he says, then he's kind of saying that we have this marriage between Zionism and Judaism, and it's a crisis of Judaism, but it happened in 1948. It didn't happen
but the problem is like the thing that he's offering, and I think a lot of the people who are listening to him, is like, we're still trying to, they're trying to revive Israel. So, and they're trying to basically say, like, I mean, I'm not so familiar with like his position specifically, but I've seen some of the discourse around this, and so I'll just speak to that, which is like, I think there is this group of people who basically want to say like, they don't call it a genocide, they say there's this war, the war went catastrophically off course, some bad things happen, but you know, those are things that countries around the world have done, so like, don't worry, Israel's just doing what countries do. Which is a pretty interesting turn of like how to kind of justify all that. And again, they're still saying like we have to invest in the good Israel, so that the people who took us off course are this radical right. It's not the whole state. It's not, you know, it's this kind of like bad stream that is taking the state off course. And we, the good Israel, the good Jewish community, have to kind of save this. And I just don't subscribe to that. And I mean, I've also seen the way that like that across the spectrum, like you can't really make a political divide in terms of like, sure, there is the settler movement in the West Bank that is committing pogroms and is ethnically cleansing Palestinian communities there, but that movement is in deep partnership with the government, and it is a state project that is committing that. It's the same state that is committing the genocide in Gaza. The army of that state has people across the political persuasion who are all participating in that army, and then you have a citizenry that is also, again, lending active support to that project. And again, like the Israeli protest movement mostly was about bringing home the hostages, was never about protecting Palestinian life or about stopping the destruction of Palestinian cities. And so and again, like when I hear those conversations happening in parts of the community that I come from, I mean, it is just like, it is never not shocking to me how quickly they managed to erase Palestinians and the like Palestinian reality and existence at all from the conversation. They just make it about like us and our own internal crisis. I mean, it makes me think about, there's a quote that I think about all the time from the Palestinian writer Tariq Bakoni, who gave this speech at this conference that I was at with him in Berlin, where he's a conference called Hijacking Memory, and he said, I can't help but think to myself that Palestinians are just the canvas upon which the Jewish psychodrama takes place. And I found that line so devastating, and I think about it all the time, because when I hear something like this from Harari that is like, again, about this crisis in Judaism, that is not explicitly naming that like the crisis is that a massive, every major institution of our community just participated in a genocide that has made a place of where 2 million people called home, that has basically erased it from from Earth. I mean, the fact that you could even talk about that crisis and not acknowledge like the massive calamity that is on the hands of our community it's simply unacceptable to me.
Simone Zimmerman, thank you. It's been a very interesting discussion.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.